Back in the day, there was a different kind of back-to-school supply shopping. It didn't mean walking into a department store and picking out a new backpack or a calculator that fits on your wrist. And if you went to school between the 50s and the 80s, chances are your family didn't buy anything new unless it absolutely had to be new. One by one, those supplies vanished so quietly, you never got to say goodbye to them. Roy Rogers metal lunchboxes. Metal lunchboxes were everywhere back then, and chances are yours had a character on it. Whether that was Roy Rogers riding across the front on his horse Trigger or someone else entirely. Didn't matter who was on yours, because the feeling was the same for everybody. That little metal clasp popping open at lunchtime, the rattle of it swinging by the handle on your walk to school, the dent it picked up after a few good knocks against the sidewalk. Nobody threw theirs away over a dent either. It just meant the box had some history behind it, and it kept doing its job either way. And if you had a Roy Rogers one specifically, you probably remember exactly what that felt like too, since he was one of the most popular ones out there at the time. But whether it was him or something else entirely, that box sitting in your hand said something about you before you ever opened your mouth. It was the first thing people saw when you sat down in that cafeteria, and it usually had a matching thermos sitting right inside it. And then there was the money itself, or more often, the tickets that stood in for it. A few coins from home, or a small paper ticket you handed over at the counter, and in exchange, you got your milk for the day. Sometimes your whole lunch, depending on how your school ran things. Losing that ticket felt like a small disaster in the moment, and if you did lose it, you knew you were explaining yourself to a lunch lady who had heard every excuse in the book already. Some kids carried their milk money in a little coin purse. Others just had it loose in a pocket, hoping it made it all the way to lunchtime without falling out somewhere on the playground. Every day, those few coins or that little paper ticket were your ticket to the lunch line, and you learned pretty quickly not to lose them. And speaking of things you were expected to be careful with, there was Aladdin thermos bottle. That thermos wasn't just carrying your lunch. It was something you were expected to keep alive for as long as possible. The inside was glass while the outside was metal. And if you dropped it even once, you learned real quick to be more careful the next time, because that soft clink you'd hear afterward meant the inside had cracked, and your milk or your soup was never staying warm again after that. So you protected it. You held it a certain way. You knew exactly how far you could tip it before something spilled. Aladdin was one of the names that made most of these, and they built them to survive a kid's entire school year, lunch after lunch, drop after drop, right up until the cap finally stopped sealing tight. And when that happened, you didn't throw the whole thing away. You just got a new cap if you could find one, because the thermos itself still had plenty of life left in it. By the time that thermos had survived a few months of school, you knew every little dent, scratch, and rattle it made. But that feeling of having something you're expected to handle with care didn't stop at the thermos either.
Look how rusted it is. I had this through 20 years of farming and 25 years of trucking.
Take Roy Rogers and Dale Evans' school supplies, for instance. They didn't stop at the metal lunchboxes we carried. Roy Rogers was following kids straight into the classroom, showing up on pencils, notebooks, rulers, and even the occasional pencil case. Once companies figured out kids wanted their heroes on everything, not just what they carried their food in, stamped with their faces or names, and sitting right beside the plain stuff. And if your family picked those up for you, even just one item, it meant something. It wasn't about the brand, the way people think about brands today. It was closer to picking a side, telling everyone at school who you looked up to. Kids traded these, showed them off, sometimes fought over whose Roy Rogers pencil was the good one, and whose was already chewed halfway down. And once that wave passed, and his shows stopped running the way they used to, these supplies quietly disappeared from the shelves too. Discontinued, vanished so quietly, you never got to say goodbye. Pee-Chee Folders. Now this one might actually still ring a bell for younger folks watching too, because Pee-Chee Folders stuck around longer than most things on this list. But if you had one back in the day, you remember it differently than someone who picked one up later. That orange folder with the athletes drawn across the front, football players mid-throw, a runner clearing a hurdle, a swimmer cutting through the water, and on the back, the multiplication tables you actually used more than once when you forgot your times tables at home. You didn't just carry that folder, you drew on it. Everybody did. Your name, somebody's initials, little doodles filling up whatever open space was left by the end of the semester. By the time the school year wrapped up, that folder looked nothing like it did the day you got it. You could look at that folder and tell exactly where you'd been sitting, who you'd been friends with, and how bored you'd gotten in class. It became yours in a way a plain folder never could. Big Chief writing tablets. If you were learning to write your letters, there's a good chance you were doing it on a Big Chief tablet. That thick, rough, tan-colored paper with the wide lines meant to help a kid figure out where the top of a letter went and where the bottom needed to stop. The cover had that Native American chief drawn on the front. To a kid sitting at a little school desk, it wasn't a historical image. It was simply the face on the tablet you were supposed to write in. And you used it because that's what the school told your parents to buy. The paper itself soaked up pencil in a way that felt completely different from anything you'd write on later in life. A little rough under your hand, a little forgiving if you pressed too hard and the lead smudged. And once you moved past those early grades, once your handwriting didn't need those training lines anymore, the Big Chief tablet disappeared from your school days almost as quickly as those first shaky letters did. Blue Horse loose-leaf binders. Once you got old enough for regular notebook paper, the loose-leaf binder became the next big purchase. And depending on where you grew up, there's a solid chance yours said Blue Horse right there on the cover. 3 holes punched down the side, nothing fancy about it. But it was cheap enough that you could buy several and not worry about running out before the school year was over. What people remember most isn't really the paper itself. It's what happened to it by the end of the year. Pages torn out at the ring, corners bent, edges frayed from getting shoved in and out of a binder too many times. And if the ring itself finally gave out on you, you didn't run out and buy a whole new binder. You found a way to make it work a little longer. You fixed it, reinforced it, or found a way to keep using it, because replacing the whole thing wasn't the first option. Esterbrook fountain pens. Before ballpoint pens became the schoolroom standard, an Esterbrook was the kind of pen you had to learn to use. And for some of us, it was the first pen we actually owned. You had to learn how to hold it the right way. Angle it so the ink flowed the way it was supposed to. And if you pressed too hard or held it wrong, you knew immediately, because the ink would either skip or blot right there on the page. These pens came with replaceable nibs, which meant when the tip wore down, you didn't throw the whole pen away. You just swapped that one part out and kept going. Some kids kept the same pen for years that way. And if you ever got ink on your fingers, on your sleeve, on the corner of your homework, you remember exactly what that felt like too. That little badge of having actually used the thing the way it was meant to be used. Sheaffer School Pen. Sheaffer made their own version of the school pen, and depending on your school, on your teacher, on what your parents happened to grab off the shelf that year, this might be the one that sat in your hand instead of the Esterbrook. Simpler in some ways, built specifically with school use in mind, made to survive being dropped, being chewed on during a boring lesson, being passed back and forth between desks when someone forgot to bring their own. The part you remember wasn't the name on the pen, it was about the ritual around it, and everything you had to do to keep it writing. Filling the ink cartridge, wiping the nib off before you put it away, making sure you didn't leave it capless overnight because you'd wake up to a dried out mess the next morning. You learned early that if you wanted that pen to keep working, you had to take care of it. Looking back now, there's a good chance that experience guided and taught you more than we realized at the time. And underneath all those fountain pens sat the ink itself. And more often than not, that ink came from a bottle labeled Carter's. Small glass bottle, dark liquid inside, sitting on a shelf at home or in a desk drawer at school, ready whenever a pen ran dry. You had to fill that pen carefully and with patience, because one shaky hand was enough to leave a dark blue stain across your desk, your fingers, or the front of your shirt. And that stain wasn't coming off easily on anything it touched. Carter's had been around for generations by the time you were using it, which meant there was a real chance your parents used the same brand in a classroom decades before you. The same little bottle could have sat on your parents' school desk years earlier, and now it was staining your fingers too. Prang watercolors. Once art class rolled around, Prang watercolors were usually the ones sitting in front of you. That flat tin box with the little dried cakes of color lined up in a row, and a paintbrush that never quite held enough water no matter how many times you dipped it. Red, blue, yellow, green, and always the black one seemed to run out first, because everybody used it for outlines, whether they needed to or not. These tins lasted an entire school year, sometimes longer, because the paint itself was solid, not liquid, so it just sat there, waiting to be used again the next time art class came around. You'd wet the brush, swirl it against whichever color you needed, and if you pressed too hard, you'd end up with a muddy tin by springtime, every color slightly bleeding into the one next to it. That muddy old tin still worked just fine, right up until the day you finally moved on to something new. Pencil box. Some kids carried a store-bought pencil box, but just as many carried something their family never had to buy at all. An old cigar box, wood, a little dusty on the inside, still faintly smelling like whatever had been sitting in it years before a kid ever claimed it for school. Somebody's father, somebody's grandfather, had one sitting in a drawer or a closet doing nothing, and a kid walked off with it and gave it a whole new job. And honestly, the cigar box usually won. Sturdier than the plastic ones, roomier too. Enough space for pencils, a ruler, maybe a few of those little erasers, all rattling around together every time you picked it up. The hinge creaked a little if you'd had it long enough. The corners got soft and rounded from being handled every day. But that box didn't care what it used to hold. It just kept doing whatever job you needed from it, one thing after another, right up until you outgrew it completely. Library paste. Before glue sticks existed the way we know them now, there was library paste. That thick white stuff sitting in a jar with a lid that never quite screwed all the way shut. You used a little wooden stick, or sometimes just your finger, to scoop some out, and if you're being honest, there's a good chance you tasted it at least once, because pretty much every kid did. And it had this strange, almost sweet, chalky flavor that somehow every single person who grew up using it remembers the same way. You spread it across construction paper, book report covers, and whatever else the teacher had you cutting and pasting that week. It wasn't strong the way modern glue is. Sometimes things fell apart a day later and you just pasted it again. But that jar sat on a shelf in nearly every classroom for years, refilled when it ran low, and if 2 pieces of paper came loose the next day, you simply reached for the paste and stuck them back together. Fiskars Scissors are one of the only things on this list you can still walk into a store today and buy. But if you had a pair back in school, you remember them a little differently than someone picking one up now. That orange handle was impossible to miss in a pencil box, and if your school had a shared classroom set, you knew exactly which pair was the good one, the one that actually cut a straight line versus the one that had gone dull. You learned to cut carefully with those because if you were left-handed, You already know the extra trouble that came with scissors built for right-handed kids, twisting your wrist just to get a clean cut. And once you got your own pair, one that actually fit your hand right, you held on to it, kept it in the same spot in your desk or your bag, because a good pair of scissors that actually worked was worth protecting. That orange Fiskars handle could still be spotted across a classroom, but back then, you knew exactly what made one pair better than another. Crayola 64-count crayon box. If Prang handled your watercolors, Crayola handled everything else. And getting the 64-count box instead of the smaller one felt like a genuine milestone. That built-in sharpener on the back of the box, the way the colors were arranged in perfect rows, gold and copper and silver, sitting there looking almost too fancy to actually use. Everybody had a favorite color that ran out first, and everybody had one color that sat there completely untouched the entire year, usually something like burnt sienna, because nobody quite knew what to draw with it. A 64-count box wasn't something you took for granted, especially when you knew there wasn't another one waiting for you if you lost it. You lined the crayons back up after using them. You tried to keep the wrappers on as long as possible, and by the end of the year, that box looked completely different from the one you started with. Colors worn down to nothing, some completely snapped in half, but every single one of them still usable right up until summer. Brown paper book covers. At the start of every school year, before you even opened a single textbook, there was one job waiting for you at the kitchen table: covering your books in brown paper. Sometimes that paper came from a grocery bag your family had saved specifically for this, folded flat and stored somewhere until school started back up. You'd wrap it around the book, fold the corners, tape it down, and if you were feeling creative, you'd cover the whole thing in drawings once it was done. That brown paper wasn't just decoration, it had a job to do. Keep a school-owned textbook clean enough to hand back when the year was over. So protecting it mattered, and everybody understood that without anyone needing to explain it to them. Some kids got really good at it, corners sharp, no wrinkles anywhere. Others just did whatever got the job done well enough to pass a teacher's check at the start of class. Back-to-school supplies these days feel more like a consolation prize for summer ending, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how things are now. But it wasn't always that way. There was a time when getting ready for a new school year felt less like an ending and more like stepping into something. A new pencil case instead of a cigar box, a fresh box of crayons, a lunchbox that was finally yours and nobody else's. Before you scroll away, we'd like you to share with us your back-to-school experience, or the ones you had with your own kids later as an adult. There's a good chance somebody watching had the exact or similar one, and they've probably been waiting for someone else to bring it up first. Thank you for staying with us. I'll see you in the next one.